So here we're looking at a recent clear cut that's being site prepped ahead of planting, probably planted here this winter. It's it's September of 2020 right now. You can see behind me the pile that they're pulling up. So that's usually the first step, or one of the first steps after that clear cut is finished on most industrial timberland. What we've got operating out here is a loader, rubber tire loader, with a raking attachment on the front of it. So what you can see behind me here is the pile, and you can see the rubber tire loader that's basically dragging up that material. And if you look closely, you can see obviously he's disturbing the soil, but very little dirt is ending up in the pile, which is a sign of a good raking operation. You want to get the larger debris out of the way. You can see the logs, you can see some of the stumps and things like that. You can see some of the mats of vegetation, those sorts of things. And he's sort of working his way back and forth across and creating these distinct piles. You can see that if you started moving everything into a long windrow, into a long hedge basically of that debris, the tendency would be to start to catch more dirt, to start to build up that pile a little bit more. But these discrete piles, that allows that not to happen, so you don't get as much topsoil rearrangement on the site. In most instances, you do this in summer, maybe late summer. You'd get it, or earlier even in a lot of instances, and you let it sit. This crew's actually going to bed this probably next week and try to get those beds to settle and get it planted here this winter, which is very fast. But it's an idea about what raking looks like out in the field. You can see, obviously, it looks like a bomb went off. And that's part of the industrial timber management that's going on in the southeast at this point. But you can also see that, again, there's very little topsoil rearrangement going on out here. The fact that this site's going to be bedded again afterwards, probably have an herbicide treatment, a late summer herbicide treatment, early fall herbicide treatment, and then it'll be ready to go. But one of the reasons you rake, obviously, is to get that heavy debris out of the way. And quite often, raking is a requirement before you do any bedding operation on a site. The bedders, you can see in other parts of this video, they're basically trying to pile up that topsoil, pile up that dirt, so that you can get a little bit of drainage and so you can get a little bit more topsoil concentration along those furrows, or on the top of the beds. But a bedding plow isn't going to be able to move through larger chunks like what you're seeing here. And so raking is typically a first step or a necessary step ahead of the bedding process, or you can't get to the dirt. There's too much debris in the way. So here we've got a bedding operation. We've got a skidder pulling a bedding plow. You see, walk up the top of the hill here in a second, but this is the unbedded stuff. It was chopped previously. You see as he comes past, you can see him pulling that material together and then packing it down behind it. And obviously that's where the trees will be planted, is right down that bed. So a little bit higher ground, concentrated. It also sort of tills that ground so you get a nice, clean, aerated, it's not packed down or compacted. Allows him to do some good work. So we're just standing on top of one of the beds here, and you can see where it's been packed down. It's been pulled up from the sides and then packed down on top. And then as you come down, you're obviously in the gap between the beds. Got another bed on your right, bed on your left. So you, here in this winter, be planting seedlings down both of the tops of these beds. This is just a single pass bedding operation. Sometimes they'll do it twice, go over those same beds again. But you see here, we're standing in the gap between beds. This is on about a 14-foot center, which is reasonably typical. Realize that when you get your beds put in, that's also dictating where you're going to plant your trees and the spacing between the rows. So if you're operating on a 12 feet between beds, then obviously the beds need to be set up that way before you plant your seedlings. So you can see these beds are mostly dirt. This is a good bedding operation. There's not a whole lot of organic material that's embedded in here. It's mostly dirt. One of the things you have to be cognizant of is how tightly packed these beds are, because right now there's an awful lot of air that's embedded in these beds. You put a pine tree into the bed, the roots will in often cases not get packed well enough that the moisture you'll get sort of air mortality associated with the roots. So the general rule of thumb is at least 2 months to allow those beds to naturally settle. Typically 3 is really a better number to work from, but it also depends on how much rain you're getting. How much rain is going to go ahead and pack those beds and compact them down. So if we came back to this site here in a couple months, I would expect these beds to have settled down probably a couple inches. And that's a good thing. That's what you want to see, obviously, because it's going to make for a better planting surface when you actually get your seedlings in the ground. So this is just a better stopped while it's in the middle of creating the new bed, and you can see the discs down here, the harrows that are pulling the dirt up and compiling it in the middle. And then you can see behind you here, this is a good dirt bed, not a lot of organic material in there. There's always going to be a little bit, obviously. Then you got the packer behind it that's actually pressing it together, trying to get it to stand up, and also compacting it, starting the compaction process. And then you can see behind it, obviously, lots of dirt, good compact bed. It's a great operation. Yeah, so climbing into the skidder, to just give you an idea about how much visibility there is, what the operator is looking at, what they can see. Skidders are a big piece of equipment, so you can see how their visibility is pretty limited. Think also about how much they can see looking up. There's very little ability to see overhead, and so they're pretty restricted on what they can see. One of the reasons why I tend to be long, straight lines. So another site prep tool that we've talked about is a chopper, a drum chopper. You can see this one's hooked up to be pulled by a skidder. Big heavy operations, a good heavy robust drum, 10 foot wide. But you can see basically it's not driven by anything, it's just dragged over the ground and rolls. And you can see these blades that basically make these indentations in the ground. And really the point is not to disturb the ground, it's to crush up the material, the debris that's left over, or that's growing in there. This is a tool that's used just as much in industrial site prep for pine plantation development, planting, as it is for fuel management and things like that, ahead of a prescribed burn or ahead of an herbicide application, trying to crush down hardwoods so that you can go ahead and get some of the grass to come back in, those sorts of things. One of the interesting things to talk about, we've talked about how almost all the pieces of equipment, the mechanical equipment that we've talked about, you need to operate cross slope. So if the slope's coming down like this, you'd want to run the equipment back and forth this way so that you don't create a trench erosion issues. But with a chopper, you actually want to run it up and down the slope because you can see it's creating these furrows behind it that are running perpendicular to the direction of travel. So you can see how it's also crushed this debris, this material down here, breaking it up so that you can get a bedding plow into here, but also, you know, it's crushing down all of this gallberry and blackberry and this kind of stuff. Palmetto, all those sorts of things. You can see how it would really crush that and get it out of the way. But you want to run it up and down slope. You can see it's creating these trenches, these furrows where the blades are impacting as they roll over the ground. And those could be a conduit for water. And so a drum chopper should be run up and down the slope so that these things end up running perpendicular to the direction of the slope, perpendicular for the way the water would potentially want to run downhill. So we're sitting here with Jimmy Bielling. Jimmy's a silvicultural contractor based out of Providence, Florida, which is up near Lake Butler. Jimmy's a longtime friend of the school and been involved in this industry and land management for decades. I'll let him talk more about that. He's also the president-elect. Is that the right term?
President-elect, that's right.
President-elect of the Florida Forestry Association coming up. This is recorded in September of 2020. And so, Jimmy, tell me a little bit about your business, what you do and how you make it work.
Well, 40 years ago, we started a silvicultural contracting business, mostly planting trees. We would use our farm equipment during the off seasons, and we'd plant trees, and of course that led into a little bit of mowing and understory management, vegetation management. And then as we got busier, we put on bulldozers with choppers and bedders, and kind of grew the business from 1 or 2 pieces of equipment to probably somewhere around 25 or so pieces of silvicultural type of equipment, including farm tractors that we plant with and spray with as well. But we probably do about 7,000 or 8,000 acres a year, and we have customers like Rayonier, Weyerhaeuser, and Langdale family out of the Valdosta, Georgia area, and a host of private landowners that we have taken care of for almost that whole 40 years. And we have a mix of mechanical site prep with a little chemical site prep to round out our forestry reforestation business.
How much work do you do with public agencies or private landowners who are interested in land management for wildlife habitat, for restoration, those sorts of things?
Well, we are not as involved as a consultant as we are just a silvicultural contractor, but we do manage a couple thousand acres of timberland that we manage for the wildlife as well as for timber production, and to maintain a good income stream to sustain the operation. So my great uncle would have been their great granddaddy, and his mother lived to be 105, and we used to talk to her about the Civil War. She was she was young during the Civil War.
Yeah.
But anyhow, my family migrated down from the Carolinas, and we were all farmers and timber people and stuff. So and Providence right here is a bit of our, this kind of area we settled in was down here, and all this land that you look around here where you see this plantations, all that was old growth timber that when it got of a certain age, and was stopped growing, then obviously we had to clear cut it, and we had enough junk butts we could have built 10,000 houses. But at any rate, it was, I'm proud of the heritage, honestly, because we're just hard-working people and we were. Big thing is we had great parents, great grandparents that taught us how to work and taught us how to do things. And the history is it's just great for me.
When were you born, Jim?
I was born in 49. Daddy was in the Marine Corps, served during World War II. He was discharged after they dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I don't know if it was a year or what, but he had a 4-year tour at least. And he was in China when he was discharged, so I'm gonna say 46 he probably got home. Started school at Florida on the GI Bill.
Right,
and got married, and then I popped up and trying to farm and trying to go to school at the same time in the School of Engineering. He finally had to farm full time, but later on in life he was able to kind of chase his career with the Department of Transportation. So and he did all right there. He did well.
Sure.
So it's but it's all part of our heritage. That old house up there was built in 1905, and I'm getting ready to spend a bunch of money on it, I guess, just because of the legacy. But
I'm sure,
but it's just something you have to do. I'd be a lot better off if I built a new house, but
you can't do that with clear conscience.
No, I couldn't. I mean, that thing's got a lot of history behind it. So anyhow, we might have to make a bed and breakfast out of it to pay for it.
So what are some of the things that have made you successful in this field. Some of the things that the services that you provide to landowners, or things that have allowed you to do well in the market and those sorts of things. What are the things that sort of drive your business?
I would say I've always had a little saying, give our customers, and I'm talking to my employees, I'm saying, always give our customers a little sugar for a dime. Let's put that extra effort out there and make sure everything is perfect. But with the way silvicultural has done over the past 40 years, it has kind of evolved into an agricultural operation where we got fertilization that we need to be precise with. We got chemical applications where we need to be precise, and so our centers, we use GPS units to get our uniformity in our plantations, and that saves our customers money because they can calibrate their chemical applications, they can calibrate their fertilization programs to get it down to the perfect number that they want on a per unit basis. So I would say that the thing that has helped us as much as anything is we've been willing to adjust to the trends and the times and the automation and the newer type equipment that we kid our operators that run the stuff with a stick steer or a joystick that they must have been good with PlayStation because they operate the equipment well. But that's the type of things that probably has helped us as much as anything, is we've been willing to make those adjustments and keep up with the times and the changes in the automation with the equipment and the new styles of equipment and so forth.
What's the biggest challenge? What's the biggest day-to-day issue that you run into that sort of gets in the way of you being really productive?
I would say one of the biggest challenges we have today is personnel, because what we're trying to do is we started a couple of classes for young people that are interested in learning how to operate forestry equipment to go to those schools, and then hopefully we can hire them, and by going to those schools they're master loggers. When they finish, they got a lot of safety training, and so that helps us with our insurance, we hope, in the end. But it also helps us from a stewardship perspective, so that when we're out there working on the lands, we're good managers and we are good stewards of that land, and protecting our clean water, protecting our air, and obviously we're doing our part to sequester carbons because we're planting trees, and you know that story. So any rate, we feel like that we have made those adjustments, but it's not an easy life. It's not for the weak at heart. You got to be tough as nails to stay in this business, and you got to be pretty quick to keep up, because the financing can overwhelm you if you're not pretty careful with your expenditures.
So labor's been your biggest issue here recently, and so is that driven you to think about lower labor saving equipment, stuff like that, or is there even really an option to do that?
Well, there's not a lot of option there, but we have to, as my son says, we have to be smarter in what we're working with here. So what we have to do is figure out the type of equipment that we need, and we basically have to size our operation to the quality personnel that we can hire that's going to take care of a $275,000 or $80,000 piece of machinery. In some cases it can go up to almost $400,000 for some of the equipment that we have to use in our day in and day out operations. But we have to make sure that we keep the right personnel, and there's so much involved with that, with drug testing, with personalities, with safety-minded people, because one lawsuit can ruin you and put you out of business. So safety is foremost. It's like we say around here, safety doesn't take a holiday. It's always there, and you need to put that first in front of everything. But we've got good personnel. Everybody has to be coached a little bit, and of course, with the current situation we're in now with COVID-19, that even adds more difficulty to it, and trying to keep our personnel safe, coach them so that they make sure that they are safe even when they're not at work, in terms of infections and or becoming infected. So it's a challenge, but in the end, it's worth it. I can look across the field and see a plantation that we put in, and that's rewarding in itself. And we can drive from the farm here to Lake Butler, and I can identify at least a half a dozen plantations that we had something to do with. So that is rewarding. That makes up for all the days that you were digging out a bulldozer that was buried up to the cab or something of the sort, or breakdowns that are expensive. But you know, it's a job that's got to be done. It's important, but it's not for everybody.
It strikes me that scheduling becomes a real issue, because you're dealing with weather, you're dealing with labor, dealing with equipment that breaks down, all those sorts of things. Do you have a system that you use to sort of try to manage your scheduling of different operations, or?
Well, we have all become meteorologists. Weather is very important. At 5:30 to 6 in the morning, the TV is on the local station, and we're looking at the weather. And we're watching the guys out of the Gainesville station, and by the way, they're pretty good. And then of course on our cell phones and iPads and everything, we've got access to current weather. But it does make a difference, particularly this year. We've had an extraordinary amount of rain, and so we're moving from one location to another, trying to find places that we can work and leave the work quality when we pull out. So that's been a difficult situation for us this year, but it's out of the ordinary, the amount of rain and conditions that we've had to deal with this year. But it's something that you need to be aware of and be prepared for, and then when the time comes that you can make hay, as they say, when the sun shines, you got to turn the acres out and try to have it done, because the whole thing is about timing. We got to get the beds in so that the chemical application can be applied at the proper time, and if we need a second bed after that, our timing is right, and then we have to have so many days on those beds after the chemicals have been applied before we plant. So it gets to be a little bit of a task trying to get all the timing down.
So talk a little bit about how things have changed in the last couple decades, how the silvicultural contractor industry has evolved, how the different practices have evolved, those sorts of things.
Over the decades, we have obviously had a lot of improvements in genetics. It's amazing what they have done with the different species that we plant in our area, there is still a lot of loblolly that's planted with slash and a longleaf, and depending on the soil types. But the genetics and the research that has been completed is extraordinary. And so over the past 10 or 15 years, we've seen some excellent things happen in that category and to deal with genetics. But then again, we've also had a difference in the way the understory has been managed because of chemical treatments that started 20 years ago. So we don't have the real difficult and heavy understory that we used to have, which would require chopping, then maybe burning, and then a rake, and then a bed or even a double bed. A lot of that chopping work has been eliminated just because of vegetation management, understory management. But there has also been some changes in the bedding harrows. We used to use the old Rome bedding harrows that had the hourglass packer on the back, and about 6,000-7,000 pounds was the original weight of the earlier ones, and then Remco came out with some that was around 10,000. But the Savannah plow has come around, and it's been a big change in the industry, if you will, in terms of the quality of a bed, the height of a bed, the tillage of the bed, and what we do is, in a lot of cases, is we have a bed and harrows with a middle buster, so we'll get some tillage in the middle, and sometimes that'll eliminate a second pass. But then other times, you know, we're just use the 4 blades, the 2 on each side, and we just, particularly if the bed's going to have a long time to settle and set up. But that's a couple of things that has changed in the industry. I would say the ground speed too we're able to pull those bedders at just about as fast as an operator can sit in the seat. And so you're up there at close to 4.5 miles an hour. So obviously you're getting more tillage at that point because of the ground speeds. So there's been a lot of changes for the good in this business. And you know, we've seen a lot of younger people come on. I've been in this business for almost 40 years, and there's probably a good half a dozen or so young people that have gotten their feet wet in this business as well. So, you know, there's going to be somebody there to take my place. And of course, my son, I don't know why I would have thought that, you know, watching me all these years, he'd say, oh, I'll do something different. But no, he loves it. It's where his heart is. And it's like being an athlete, you know, let your heart, you know, find your heart. And that's where you go.
My closing question for you was, you know, what's one piece of advice you'd give students who are coming through forestry program, land management, natural resource students?
I would say make sure that's what you love, because at the end of the day, you don't want to just call it at 8 hours. You may have a 9 or you may have a 10-hour day, but do what you love. But if I had to say any one thing to somebody, it would be what a former NFL football player told me one time, was to find your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll lead you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.